I still remember the day Mr. John Harper, 74, told me, "Doc, I don't know when it started, but these legs, they don't feel like mine anymore." He didn't come in because he was in pain. There was no injury, no specific complaint, just something wasn't right. It began, as it often does, in the smallest ways. He found himself reaching for furniture a little more than usual while moving around the living room. He paused a few seconds longer before getting up from the couch. He avoided the garden stairs, not because he couldn't climb them, but because it felt easier to stay indoors. You wouldn't call it a problem, not yet. That's what makes this so tricky. So many of my patients brush it aside. It's just aging, they tell themselves. Or maybe I'm just tired this week. But deep down, there's often a quieter voice asking, is this what getting old feels like? For John, that question didn't have an answer, not for a long time. His story is familiar, and that's what makes it important. He had always been an independent man, retired electrician, proud father, used to climb ladders and fix wires with steady hands and strong knees. So when his legs started to feel unpredictable, not weak exactly, just not the same, it shook something in him. He didn't say it out loud, but I could hear it in his pauses, the worry that maybe this wasn't going to go away on its own, that maybe this is how it starts. At first, he told himself it was the cold weather or the floors. Then he switched shoes, bought thicker socks. When that didn't help, he started skipping his evening walks. "It's nothing serious," he kept saying to his daughter. But then came the small stumbles, the cautious steps, and a growing reluctance to go anywhere that wasn't absolutely necessary. Not fear exactly, more like uncertainty, like his legs were now something he had to think about instead of something he could trust. When he finally walked into my office, he didn't come to ask for a diagnosis. He came for reassurance. But here's the truth I had to gently give him, and one I'll give you too. These things don't suddenly begin, and they don't suddenly end. They creep in, slowly, quietly. And the hardest part is, they convince you it's normal. The way you start sitting more during the day. The way you take smaller steps, just in case. The way you stop bending your knees fully without even realizing it. I've seen it in dozens of patients. They weren't waiting for help. They just didn't think help was even needed yet. And maybe that's why you're here too. Maybe lately, walking's been feeling different. Maybe your knees are a little more stubborn in the mornings. Maybe you're not exactly in pain, but you're not exactly strong either. You wouldn't call it a problem, not yet, but something inside you knows. Something's changing. Now here's what I told John, and what I want you to hear clearly. This isn't just aging, and it isn't your fault. But if you've started walking less, for whatever reason, now is the time to pay attention. Not because something terrible is around the corner, but because something important might already be happening. And if you catch it early enough, you'd be surprised how much can still come back. But for John, it wasn't awareness that made him act. It took something else, something that caught him completely off guard. And I'll tell you exactly what that was in just a moment.
John had always brushed things off, even when the little hesitations in his steps turned into full pauses, even when he found himself holding the railing with both hands just to go down 3 steps to the porch. He still laughed with his daughter on the phone, still waved to the neighbor from the lawn chair. But behind closed doors, there was a growing unease. Not fear, not yet, but something was building. Then, one morning, it happened. He had just woken up, same as always, and was reaching for the edge of the bed. The sunlight was coming in through the window. The room was quiet, familiar, safe. But as he stood, something felt wrong. Not painful, just unstable. His left leg didn't catch him the way it usually did. For a second, just one, He wobbled, and in that second, he saw himself falling. Not the full fall, just the image of what could have happened. His hand shot out to the nightstand, knocking his glasses to the floor. He caught himself. He didn't fall. But that was the first time in his life that John felt fragile. Not old, not weak, just suddenly aware that his legs weren't the reliable partners they had always been. He sat back down slowly, heart pounding. That moment haunted him the rest of the day. He didn't tell his daughter, didn't call me, but I could see it on his face when he came in 2 weeks later. There's a kind of look people wear when they've glimpsed the future and didn't like what they saw. I asked what brought him in, and he just said, "Doc, I think I almost had a fall, and I don't know what that means." That sentence stayed with me, because that's how it often starts, not with pain, but with doubt. Suddenly, you find yourself avoiding the park, turning down the invitation to the family picnic, letting the dog out instead of going with him, not because you can't walk, but because you're not sure if you should. And when that uncertainty creeps in, it's like gravity pulls heavier on everything, not just your legs, but your spirit too. John told me that the worst part wasn't the stumble, it was what came afterward. He started second-guessing every move. Was the hallway too slippery? Were his shoes too worn? Should he be using a cane just in case? He even found himself searching online for mobility devices, reading reviews, scrolling through products he never imagined needing. That's when it hits most people. This might not fix itself. And that realization is both terrifying and incredibly powerful. Because in that moment, the one where hope feels thin, there's also a choice. You can keep shrinking your world to stay safe, or you can start asking a different question. Not, what if I fall, but what can I do now so I don't? That's what John and I talked about that day. Not about fear, but something far more useful, curiosity. Because sometimes all it takes is asking the right question to uncover something surprising. And in John's case, what he learned next didn't come from a device or a test or a new pair of shoes. It came from understanding what was really going on inside his legs. If this part of John's story sounds familiar, if you've ever caught yourself hesitating to stand or quietly wondering if your balance has changed, consider tapping the like button. It helps this kind of honest conversation reach more people like you. Let's keep going. What was actually happening in John's body and why it felt like his legs were betraying him surprised him, and I think it might surprise you too.
John sat quietly as I explained, not nodding, not frowning, just listening. It's the kind of silence I've come to recognize in patients who sense they're about to hear something important. I asked him a question first. "John, do you remember the last time you sprinted?" He laughed. "Sprint? That was probably 1982. But the smile faded. Then I asked, "How about the last time you stood up without thinking about it?" He paused longer. That's the thing about the legs. They carry us for decades without complaint. Upstairs, across fields, in and out of chairs. They serve us quietly. Until one day, they don't. And by the time we notice, something underneath has already changed. I told John, gently, "Your legs aren't failing. They're slowing down for a reason." Here's the part most people don't realize. As we age, muscle tissue naturally thins out, especially in the legs, and it happens faster than we expect. Not because of disease, not even because of injury, but because we unknowingly stop using certain muscles the way we used to. Little by little, the brain stops calling those muscles, and in response, those muscles stop answering. Imagine a phone that rings once a year. Eventually, you forget it's even there. That's what happens to the muscle fibers that used to keep your knees steady, your ankles springy, your hips balanced. And then there are the joints. John mentioned his knees felt tight in the morning. He thought maybe it was arthritis. But sometimes it's not the joint itself, it's what surrounds it. When we move less, the tissue around the joints stiffens. The fluid that usually helps them glide becomes sluggish, like oil left in a cold engine. It's not just about pain, it's about friction. Your knees don't want to bend deeply anymore. Your hips don't want to swing fully when you walk. And suddenly, your stride shortens. You start shuffling. You take fewer steps. And your body, ever the efficient machine, says, "Oh, we're not using those muscles anymore." Okay, and it lets them go. But what hit John hardest wasn't the muscles or the joints. It was something else entirely. Something I only hinted at during that first talk. I looked him in the eye and said, "John, your legs aren't just tired. They've been forgotten." He didn't say anything right away. Then he nodded once, slow, almost like he was remembering something, like he could feel the parts of him that hadn't been called on in a long time. It wasn't guilt, it was recognition. And recognition is powerful, because you can't change what you haven't noticed. He asked me quietly, "So what now?" And that's when things started to shift, not in his body, but in his attitude. Because the moment you realize there's still more in you than what you've been using, that's when the story begins to turn. What John did next wasn't complicated. In fact, it was something small, something most people would never even think to try. But it worked. And it was the beginning of everything coming back.
John came back 2 weeks after our talk. He was wearing the same shoes, same jacket, but something in his posture had shifted. Not straighter, not stronger, just more present. Like a man who'd decided to stop waiting for answers and start doing something about what he already knew. He sat down, looked at me, and said, "I've been paying attention, and you're right, I've stopped using these legs." He wasn't talking about walking. He still walked, to the kitchen, to the mailbox, around the house, but that's not what he meant. He had realized something deeper. He'd stopped challenging his legs. There was a time when he used to bend all the way down to pick up a dropped coin. A time he would climb the stairs 2 at a time without thinking. Even just standing from a low chair used to be something he did 10 times a day, naturally, unconsciously. But over time, those little actions had disappeared. Not out of laziness, not out of fear. They had simply faded. Reaching down became reaching around. Sitting became leaning. And standing? That became a series of hesitations. That's when he asked, "So how do I tell my legs I still need them?" I told him something I tell all my patients. If you stop asking your legs to do hard things, they'll stop remembering how. And I gave him just one thing to start with. Not a workout, not an exercise routine. A habit. I asked him to do something that sounded almost too simple. Every morning, before breakfast, he'd sit in a chair and stand up, then sit down, then stand up again. 10 times. No weights, no timers. Just slow, careful repetitions. He looked puzzled. "That's it?" "Yes." I told him, "That's it for now." Because that movement, standing up from a chair, uses nearly every muscle in the lower body. And more importantly, it tells the brain we still need this system online. The next morning, he did it. It took effort. His knees crackled a bit. By the 7th rep, he had to pause. but he finished. And when he sat back down for the last time, something small had changed. Something important. He didn't feel fixed, but for the first time in a long time, he felt involved in his own recovery. That 10-minute habit became his morning ritual. He even gave it a name, the wake-up call. And the funny thing is, by the 5th day, he didn't need to use the arms of the chair anymore. By the 10th, he found himself standing up without thinking in the middle of the day, just like before. It didn't happen fast. It didn't happen easily, but it started. And that's all the body needs sometimes. A clear, repeated message. We're still here. We still care. Now, what surprised John, and what tends to surprise most people, is what happened next. Because once you start waking the legs up again, they don't just get stronger. They start responding in ways that affect your entire sense of stability. And one small thing John added to his mornings made a huge difference in how steady he felt all day.
By the end of the first week, John had kept up his morning chair stands every single day. He said it gave his mornings structure, something to lean into before the noise of the day started, something that felt like his. But what struck him even more than the physical change was how his mind started to follow. He told me, "Doc, I feel like I'm coming back into myself." And that's when I knew it was time to show him what else was quietly working for him, or against him. Because here's something I see far too often. A patient starts moving again. They put in the effort, but their body isn't fully responding. Why? Because movement without the right fuel can only go so far. I asked John what he usually had for breakfast. His answer was toast, tea, maybe some fruit, if I remember. Harmless on the surface, but for someone trying to regain leg strength and stability, it was missing two silent heroes: protein and minerals. The body needs raw material to rebuild muscle and maintain strong joints. And as we get older, it takes more effort and more intention to get enough of what our legs actually need. So I gave him a small suggestion. Add something rich in protein, like boiled eggs or a scoop of plain Greek yogurt, and pair it with something that carries magnesium and potassium, like a banana or a handful of soaked almonds. He looked surprised. Just food, not a pill? I smiled. Just food, but food with a purpose. He tried it the next morning. A soft boiled egg, a banana, his usual tea. Nothing fancy, nothing strange. But 2 days later, he called me. "Doc, I don't know if this sounds silly, but I feel steadier when I walk. It's like my legs aren't arguing with me as much." That's the beauty of small, intentional change. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Now, the second thing we worked on, and this one really surprised him, was something he hadn't done since his 50s. I asked him to stand near the kitchen counter, hold on lightly, and slowly lift his heels, up and down, 10 times, every evening while waiting for the kettle to boil. Heel raises. He laughed. "That's it?" I nodded. "That's it." You see, those small movements light up the calf muscles, the ankles, and the deeper stabilizers we don't think about until they start to weaken. He didn't feel much on day 1, but by day 5, he said something curious. "Doc, I don't know if this sounds silly, but I feel steadier when I walk. It's like my legs aren't arguing with me as much." That's the beauty of small, intentional change. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Now, the second thing we worked on, and this one really surprised him, was something he hadn't done since his 50s. I asked him to stand near the kitchen counter, hold on lightly, and slowly lift his heels, up and down, 10 times, every evening while waiting for the kettle to boil.
heel raises. He laughed. That's it. I nodded. That's it. You see, those small movements light up the calf muscles, the ankles, and the deeper stabilizers we don't think about until they start to weaken. He didn't feel much on day 1, but by day 5, he said something curious. "Doc, I don't know if this sounds silly, but I feel steadier when I walk. It's like my legs aren't arguing with me as much." That's when I knew we were onto something. And if any part of this is making you think, maybe I could try that too, go ahead and tap the like button. Not just for me. It helps more people your age find small, hopeful steps like this. What was happening was deeper than just strength. He was reconnecting. His brain and his legs were having full conversations again, not just small talk. And slowly, the old doubt began to fade. Not completely, not yet, but there was a little more trust in every step. That's when I noticed something in his tone I hadn't heard in a while. Hope. And hope, when it starts to return, does something incredible to the body. It softens tension, it invites movement, it reminds us that we're not finished. John wasn't just standing taller, he was standing with a sense of ownership over his recovery. But what neither of us fully expected, and what changed things in a much deeper way, was what happened when we started looking beneath the surface. Because even though he was gaining strength, something invisible was still quietly working against him. And until we faced that, his progress could only go so far.
John had been doing everything right. His legs were stronger, he was standing more easily, walking a bit further each day, and eating with more intention. But then something happened. Not a setback, more like a slowdown. He told me, "Doc, it's weird. I feel more stable, but some days I still feel heavy, like I'm dragging a little extra weight in my knees." He hadn't changed anything in his routine. He wasn't injured. But something wasn't adding up. So I sat down with him and asked a different set of questions. How much water are you drinking? What kinds of snacks are creeping in during the day? Do you ever feel puffy or swollen, maybe in the ankles or hands? He paused. Now that you mention it, yeah, I've noticed my ankles look thick in the evening. I thought it was just old age. But it wasn't just age, and it wasn't just water retention. What we were dealing with, quietly, invisibly, was inflammation. Not the kind that sends you to the hospital, the kind that builds up silently over weeks, months, even years, especially in the joints, especially in people who aren't moving as much. And here's what many people don't realize. Even when you start building your legs back, inflammation can keep you feeling stuck, tight, slow, or heavy. It doesn't scream, it whispers. A little morning stiffness here, a little swelling there, a general feeling that your legs just aren't clean inside. And inflammation is tricky because it feeds on two things John had been exposed to without realizing: long sitting and certain foods. He wasn't eating anything outrageous, but those packaged crackers, that sugary tea before bed, the evening bowl of canned soup with too much salt. Little things. But they were keeping his knees warm, not from activity, but from internal heat, from inflammation. I told him, this is the enemy you can't see in the mirror, but you can feel it in your walk, in your mood, in how you get up from a chair. We made a few quiet adjustments. He started walking every hour, not far, just a lap around the living room. He added a tall glass of water mid-morning, and slowly reduced the snacks that came in boxes. I also encouraged him to begin one simple evening habit to cool things down, not physically, but biochemically. And within days, he noticed something. "My knees don't feel full," he said. That was his word, full. The swelling was receding. His movements were smoother again. And the heaviness? It didn't disappear overnight, but it eased, enough for him to feel in control again. It wasn't just strength we were building anymore. It was clarity. And that changes everything. Because when you're walking around in a body that feels cleaner, cooler, quieter,
your legs respond differently. And more importantly, your confidence responds. John told me one day, over the phone, casual, like he almost forgot it was significant, "I walked to the gate and back yesterday. Didn't plan to. I just felt like it." That's the moment you wait for as a doctor, when the work stops feeling like work again and starts feeling like life again. But here's the part I didn't expect. The thing that made all this stick wasn't a movement or a meal. It was something far more personal, something John had forgotten about for years, until a phone call from someone close to him reminded him why he was trying at all.
John had been walking a little further, eating with more intention, paying attention to his body in ways he hadn't in years. He wasn't the same man who first walked into my office, unsure, hesitant, quietly worried. But real change, lasting change, doesn't happen because a doctor says, "Do this every day." It happens when the reason becomes personal. For John, that moment came in the form of a phone call. It was from his granddaughter, Sophie, 7 years old, living 2 states away. He told me she called out of the blue one afternoon, not because of anything big, just to say hello. But near the end of the call, she said something that stuck to him like glue. She said, "Grandpa, are you still coming to my dance show?" He hesitated. He had forgotten. The show was a month away. They'd talked about it back in spring, before the chair stands, before the heel raises, before he started believing in his legs again. He paused and said, "I don't know yet, sweetheart. I'm working on getting stronger." She replied in the way only a child can, with pure, simple faith. "You're strong. You always were." And just like that, something landed in him. It wasn't about walking anymore. It wasn't about the legs, the swelling, or the fear. It was about being present, about showing up, not as the version of himself that was slowing down, but as the man his granddaughter believed in. He told me the next week, "Doc, I'm going. I don't care if I have to stop every few minutes on the way there. I'm not missing this." And from that moment on, his progress stopped feeling like a project and started feeling like a promise. Every morning routine had new weight, not pressure, purpose. The chair stands, a warm-up for the auditorium stairs. The anti-inflammatory snacks, fuel for a long day with family. The quiet evening walks, practice for being steady in a crowded hall. He started adding 1 extra rep each morning, then 2, then walking a little past the gate, then to the next corner. Not because I asked him to, because she had. Sometimes it's not the fear of falling that finally gets us to change. It's the fear of missing out. Missing a birthday, a grandchild's laughter, a photo, a hug. That's what makes it stick. Not routines, not reminders, but relationships. John made it to the dance show. He sat in the second row. He stood, slowly but proudly, when Sophie took the stage. And when she waved at him mid-performance, he waved back with a grin I wish I could have bottled. He told me later, "I didn't feel like an old man in that moment. I felt like her grandpa, the one who shows up." And that, more than any stretch, supplement, or strength move, is what keeps someone walking. But I know not everyone has a Sophie. And maybe you're watching this wondering who you're doing all this for. If no one comes to mind just yet, that's okay. Because sometimes the first person you show up for is yourself.
If you're still with me, listening quietly, I want to talk to you now. Not about John, not about routines, muscles, or balance. Just you.
If you've noticed your steps getting shorter, if you found yourself hesitating before standing up, if part of you has started pulling back from the world little by little, please hear me. You are not alone, and this is not the end of the road. I've sat with so many people who came in thinking their bodies were simply wearing out. They blamed their age, their weight, their past, their luck. But more often than not, what I saw wasn't a body breaking down. It was a body waiting to be called back into service. Your legs haven't given up on you, and neither should you. You may not move the way you used to. You may have days where it all feels heavier, slower, more frustrating. That's real. That's part of this. But what matters most isn't how far you can walk right now. It's whether you believe there's still more walk left in you. Because I've seen what happens when someone decides, gently, without fanfare, to stand up just one more time, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I've seen a man go from holding the walls for balance to standing in a crowd, clapping for his granddaughter. Not because he trained like an athlete, but because he stopped waiting to feel strong and started moving toward life again, step by step. If you've been sitting more than usual lately, if you've been quietly telling yourself, I guess this is just how it is now, I want to tell you, with as much warmth as I can put into these words, it doesn't have to stay that way. Even now, yes, even now, your body is listening. And if you begin to speak to it again, through movement, through food, through small, steady attention, you might be amazed by what it remembers. Not everything will come back, but something always does. Maybe the steadiness in your step, maybe the confidence to reach for something a little farther, maybe just the feeling of trusting yourself again. And that alone is worth everything. So take this not as advice, but as an invitation. Stand, today, tomorrow, next week, not just to move, but to reclaim something. A part of you that's still here, still capable, still needed. And if this story reminded you of someone you care about, someone who's walking less or feeling like their strength is slipping away, maybe send this to them. You never know what a story might stir in someone. Thank you for spending this time with me. Truly. I'll be here again soon for the next part of the journey. Until then, keep walking, even if it's just to the window and back. It all counts.